Hello, and welcome to the turbulent world with me, James M. Dorsey, as your host. This week's U.S. sanctioning of an Israeli government backed vigilante settler group constitutes a weak shot across Israel's bow, as the United States and Europe mull expanding sanctions to include ultra nationalist members of Prime Minister Binyamin Netanyahu's cabinet. Senior executives of the sanction group, Hashomer Yosh, which focuses on protecting settler outposts in the occupied West Bank, have close ties to National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, the two cabinet members that the US and Europe may sanction. Messieurs Ben-Gvir and Smotrich themselves are settlers. The Biden administration announced the sanctions as Israel launched its largest military campaign in the West Bank in more than 2 decades, targeting Palestinian militants, according to the military. Palestinians fear the raid signal an expansion of the Gaza war to the West Bank. While sending a signal, the sanctioning of Hashomer Yosh barely scratches the surface in a country in which ultra-nationalists pursue annexationist and supremacist policies with Mr. Netanyahu's approval, albeit at times tacitly, and blood-curdling anti-Palestinian statements by government officials, lawmakers, and pundits being part of the country's daily political diet. The administration could have sent a far stronger signal if it had acted against Messieurs Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who have backed and encouraged vigilante settler attacks on West Bank Palestinians, and or Israeli military officials and units that protect the militants as they launch their assaults. Last week, Ronen Bar, the head of Israel's domestic security agency, Shin Bet, warned in letters to Mr. Netanyahu, members of his government, and the Attorney General that militant vigilante settlers posed a serious threat to national security, a sentiment echoed by the Biden administration, and should be considered terrorists. Mr. Barr said he wrote the letters with pain and great fear as a Jew, as an Israeli, and as a security official. The security chief said the militants' terror campaign was a large stain on Judaism and on all of us. Mr. Barr charged that ultra-nationalist leaders like Messieurs Ben-Gvir and Smotrich were willing to jeopardize the state's security and its very existence in the name of their ideology. Mr. Barr's notion of what Judaism stands for contrasts not only with Mr. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich's views, but also with that of some prominent mainstream diaspora religious Jewish leaders, even if many argue that Shin Bet is a critical node in the repression of Palestinian national aspirations and alleged war crimes committed by Israeli forces. Interviewed on BFM TV, France's most watched channel, French Chief Rabbi Chaim Corsia expressed a supremacist disregard for Palestinian life. Asked why almost 11 months into the Gaza war, 40,000 Palestinian deaths should not be condemned on the same terms as the killing by Hamas of some 1,200 people, mostly civilians, during the group's October 7 attack on Israel. Mr. Corsia argued that there was no equivalence between the loss of innocent Jewish and Palestinian lives. They are not of the same order, Mr. Corsia said. Mr. Corsia's views, like Mr. Netanyahu's insistence that Gazans need to be de-radicalized and re-educated, resonate in an ultra-nationalist tent camp near the Erez crossing between Israel and Gaza, where militant settlers wait for an opportunity to resettle Gaza almost 2 decades after Israeli troops withdrew from the Strip, dismantling Israeli settlements. Asserting Arabs expelled her grandparents from pre-Israel Palestine, Texas-born Ariel a proponent of ethnic cleansing, rejects the notion that she is a settler colonialist. It's not really colonialism. I'm just coming back, fulfilling my grandparents' dream. I think colonialism gets a bad rap, like genocide is bad. But colonizing places that are genocidal and have bad ideologies, it's good to come in and correct their views. We've got to ask other countries for help, Mrs. Ariel said. She asserted that Spain was willing to resettle a couple of million Gazans, while Russia would accommodate a couple of thousand. Palestinianism and ethnicity is an ideology. It's an ideology that says they want Jews dead, and so we want them as far away from Jews as possible, Mrs. Ariel said. This week's Israeli military operations in the West Bank likely buoyed Mrs. Ariel and her cohorts. If decades of settlement expansion and more recently stepped up settler vigilantism did not already communicate Israeli intentions, Foreign Minister Israel Katz left no doubts in his defense of the military operations. Mr. Katz asserted that Iran was attempting to create a Palestinian resistance infrastructure similar to Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon by providing funds and smuggling weapons from Jordan into the West Bank. We must deal with the threat just as we deal with the terrorist infrastructure in Gaza, including the temporary evacuation of Palestinian residents and whatever steps are required. This is a war for everything, and we must win it, Mr. Katz said on X. Israel has yet to issue evacuation orders like it does in Gaza. Even so, residents of the Nur Shams refugee camp, one of this week's Israeli targets, said the military was allowing civilians to leave voluntarily. While Gaza's population of more than 2 million people has been forced to leave their homes, residents of the West Bank have not endured the scale of bombardments, raids, and evacuation orders that Gazans experienced during the war. Nevertheless, like in Gaza, Israeli raids on West Bank cities and refugee camps have focused as much on pursuing militants as on the destruction of infrastructure and the meting out of collective punishment. Wafa, the news agency of the internationally recognized West Bank-based Palestine Authority, said Israeli troops have moved in on hospitals, hindered ambulances, and bulldozed infrastructure, including roads and water supplies, in Jenin, Tulkarem, and Tubas, hotbeds of Palestinian activism. Israeli analysts said the bulldozing of roads is needed to unearth improvised explosive devices. In March, Shin Bet said it had foiled attempts by Iran to smuggle large amounts of advanced weapons into the West Bank. Senior officials of al-Fatah, the backbone of the Palestine Authority, have warned of Iranian agitation. Earlier this month, al-Fatah Central Committee member Abbas Zaki asserted there are brigades being formed. People are selling jewelry, and they are getting aid from Iran, Hezbollah, or wherever. They are fighting, and they know that they will be killed. Their homes will be demolished, and their families will be destroyed. But defending one's homeland has no price. In April, Mr. Zaki favored Iran having a nuclear weapon, as his al-Fatah movement accused Iran of trying to sow chaos amid a surge in intra-Palestinian violence in the West Bank. We stand on the lookout for foreign interference, specifically Iranian interference, in Palestinian internal affairs. We will not allow the exploitation of our sacred cause and the blood of our people, al-Fatah said in a statement. Unlike Fatah, Mr. Katz ignored the fact that Israel's Gaza war conduct and long-standing undermining of the Palestine Authority, rather than allegiance to Iran, fuel Palestinian militancy in the West Bank. As a result, many West Bank Palestinians see Hamas as the only group willing and capable of standing up to Israel. To counter Israel's increasingly evident annexationist and supremacist approach, as well as the radicalization of Palestinian youth, former Palestine Authority Prime Minister Salam Fayyad recently argued that the international community needed to work around Israeli rejection of the notion of an independent Palestinian state. To achieve that, Mr. Fayyad suggested enshrining the Palestinian right to statehood in international law with a United Nations Security Council resolution. The move would ensure that Palestinians no longer need to audition for national rights that no other people in the world had to do. In other words, Mr. Fayyad proposed equating Palestinian and Israeli rights. That's when you begin to see a little bit of balance restored. It's no longer acceptable for the needs of one party to be prioritized over the needs of another party, Mr. Fayyad said. A close associate of Mohammed Dahlan, a United Arab Emirates backed former Fatah official, touted as a potential post war Gaza leader, Palestinian activist Samer Sinijlawi noted, "You can feel that there is a cocktail of anger, sadness, grief, hatred that is prevalent in both societies. But this is because of the 7th of October and the war. It is not whom the Palestinians really are, nor the Israelis." Drawing on his personal history, Mr. Sinijlawi noted, "As a teenager, I began throwing stones in the streets of my city because I wanted to free Palestine from the river to the sea. I was put in jail. 3 months later, Palestine Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat announced the Palestinian Declaration of Independence to establish a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders. I and the other inmates in my section jumped in jubilation upon hearing the news." Today, Mr. Sinijlawi argues that according to Palestinians, the status of entitled human beings Israelis claim for themselves is the key to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You need to relieve the Palestinians from the humiliation. You need to guarantee Palestinians that their human dignity is respected, Mr. Sinijlawi said. Thank you for joining me today. I am grateful to those who have become paid subscribers. I need some more to enable me to continue cutting through the fog of kinetic and information wars and offer fact-based analysis. No doubt you will have noticed that the turbulent world has no sponsors and no advertisers. This guarantees the columns and podcast independence. Instead, the turbulent world depends on the support of its readers and listeners to cover the cost of producing the column and podcast. You can contribute by clicking on Substack on the subscription button at jamesmdorsey.substack.com and choosing one of the subscription options. Thank you for your support and loyalty. Take care and best wishes.